On Christmas Eve, my son told me there was no room for me at his table, and that I should just go back home and spend Christmas alone. I swallowed my tears and thanked God that I had not given him the $100,000 check I had saved for decades to give him as a gift. It was still in my purse, along with the rest of my dignity. But that night, I made a decision that would change our lives forever. The next day, I just left a letter at his door, and when he read it, he started screaming in desperation. But before we continue, make sure you are already subscribed to the channel and write in the comments, where are you watching this video from? We love to know how far our stories are reaching. The morning of December 24th started like any other for me. I woke up at 6 a.m., just as I have every day since I retired from the school where I taught for 40 years. The sun wasn't up yet, but I was already in the kitchen preparing the traditional Christmas pudding that my son Edward always adored. This year was going to be special. After saving my entire life after selling the house where I raised my son alone after my husband's premature death, I had finally managed to gather an amount that would change his life: $100,000. As I beat the eggs, I imagined Edward's face when he opened the envelope with the check. At 45, my son always talked about opening his own restaurant, but he never got the necessary capital. His wife Vanessa, whom I only met 3 years ago when they got married, always seemed a bit distant with me, but I overlooked it. After all, gaining a mother-in-law at 38 can't be easy. I finished preparing the pudding and started getting ready for the big day. I chose my best dress, a navy blue one I bought especially for the occasion, and the pearl necklace that belonged to my mother. The taxi I called arrived promptly at 5 p.m. Edward lived about 40 minutes from my small apartment in a more elegant neighborhood of the city. During the ride, my heart was pounding. In my purse, besides the envelope with the check, I carried some modest gifts for Vanessa and her parents, who would also be present. I had never met them personally, only through photos. Edward always said they were very important people, he a real estate developer, she a high-profile lawyer. When the taxi stopped in front of my son's house, I was momentarily breathless. Christmas lights decorated the entire facade, and through the large windows I could see the movement of several people, more guests than I expected. I paid the driver and walked slowly to the door, carrying the pudding in a special dish and my purse with the gifts. I rang the bell nervously, fixing the gray hair that I had so carefully styled at the salon that morning. The door opened, and there was Edward. His face, normally welcoming, looked tense. "Mom," he said without hugging me as usual, "we weren't expecting you so soon." "But we agreed on 6 p.m., I replied, confused. Edward looked back as if checking who might hear us, and then took a step outside, partially closing the door behind him. "Look, Mom, something came up. Vanessa's parents brought some important business friends. The table is already all set and—" He hesitated, avoiding my gaze. "There's no room left for you." I felt as if the floor disappeared from under my feet. "What do you mean, no room left?" I asked, my voice almost a whisper. "It's just that they are very important people for my career, Mom. You understand, right? I was going to call you, but I got tied up with the preparations." He looked at the dish in my hands. "You brought pudding, I can take that. Vanessa will love serving it to the guests." At that moment, I heard laughter coming from inside the house. Cheerful voices, clinking glasses, Christmas music in the background. "Edward," I tried to keep my composure, though I felt my eyes watering. "I am your mother." "I know, Mom, I know," he replied impatiently. "But you don't want to ruin this important night for me, do you? We can celebrate another day, just the two of us, I promise." Before I could answer, the door opened completely, and Vanessa appeared stunning in a red dress. "Oh, Helen, what a surprise," she said with a fake smile. Then she looked at Edward with an alarmed expression. "Honey, my parents are asking for that special wine." "I'm coming," Edward replied quickly, seeming relieved by the interruption. He turned to me. "Mom, I'm really sorry, but it's not going to work out today. It's better if you spend Christmas at your place. I'll call you tomorrow, okay?" He held out his hands and took the pudding dish from me. Vanessa had already turned around and gone back inside. "Merry Christmas, Mom," he said, and before I could reply, he closed the door. I stood there staring at the closed door, feeling the December night chill seep into my bones. Through the window, I saw my son hand the pudding to Vanessa, who placed it on the beautifully decorated table. Around her, well-dressed people chatted animately. In the center of the room, a huge Christmas tree, much more luxurious than any I could ever give my son during his childhood. I took a few steps back, stunned when I heard someone comment loud enough for the sound to carry through the window. "Who was at the door, Edward?" "No one important," my son replied, pouring wine into crystal glasses. I was no one important to him. The way back home was a blur. I don't remember calling another taxi, only walking a few blocks in a daze until I found one. The driver asked if I was okay. Maybe my face betrayed my devastation, but I just mumbled an address and retreated into silence. No one important. My son's words echoed in my mind, each repetition like a stab. After 45 years, after all the sacrifices, after raising that man alone, I was not important. The taxi stopped in front of my small building. I paid the fare and got out feeling the weight of my 70 years like never before. I climbed the stairs slowly. The elevator had been broken for weeks, and when I finally opened the door to my apartment, the darkness and silence greeted me like old friends. I didn't turn on the lights right away. I preferred to sit in the gloom with only the light coming from the street through the window. My Christmas tree, small and modest, was in the corner of the living room with a few small gifts underneath. Mementos for neighbors and former work colleagues. None for me. I opened my purse and took out the envelope with the check. $100,000, the result of decades of saving of lunches not eaten at restaurants, of clothes not bought, of trips not taken. All so my son could achieve his dream. A dream that apparently did not include me. It was then that something inside me changed. The initial pain gave way to a clarity I had never experienced. My whole life I put others before myself, especially Edward. When his father died when he was just 8 years old, I promised myself that I would do everything possible so he would never feel lacking. I worked 2 jobs, saved every possible cent, gave up my own life. And for what? To be discarded like a worthless object on Christmas Eve. I walked to the small desk in the corner of the living room and turned on the table lamp. I took out a sheet of paper and a pen. The words flowed as if they had a life of their own. "Dear Edward, for 45 years you were the center of my universe. Every decision I made, every sacrifice I made was with you in mind. When your father left us, I promised you would never want for anything, and I dedicated my life to fulfilling that promise. Tonight I was going to give you a gift, the fruit of a lifetime of work and saving, $100,000 so you could finally open your restaurant. But I realized standing at your door while you told me there was no room for me, that no amount of money can buy the respect and love that a son should naturally feel for his mother. No one important, you said, and maybe you're right. Maybe I really am not important, not to the important people who are now part of your life. Along with this letter is a formal eviction notice. The house where you live with your wife, as you know, is in my name. It always has been. I bought it thinking of your future, but now I realize it was just one more of the many sacrifices I made for someone who doesn't value me. You have 30 days to vacate the property. There will be no extension. There is no point in hiring lawyers. All the documents are in order. The property is legally mine. When you said there was no room for me at your Christmas table, I decided there would no longer be room for you in my house. Ironic, isn't it? The money I saved for you added to the value from the sale of this property will be used for something I never allowed myself, to live my own life. I am going to travel, see places I always dreamed of, do things I postponed for decades while putting your needs before mine. Do not look for me. Do not try to contact me. When and if I am ready, I will get in touch. Merry Christmas. Helen. Your mother, who apparently isn't important enough for a place at your table, but is important enough to be the owner of the roof you sleep under. I reread the letter several times, silent tears streaming down my face. Then I folded the paper carefully, put it in an envelope, and tucked it into my purse. In the early morning before dawn, I would leave it at Edward's door. I looked around my small apartment. So many memories, so many years, but also so much emptiness. I realized that there was nothing holding me there anymore. My son had his own life, a life where I clearly didn't fit. My parents were long gone, friends, Few remained, most having followed the natural course of life. I was alone, completely alone on Christmas night. But instead of feeling defeated, I felt a strange sense of liberation, as if a huge weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The weight of always putting Edward before everything, of living through him, of existing only as Edward's mother, and not as Helen, the woman with her own dreams. I walked to the bedroom and opened the closet. In the back, there was an old suitcase rarely used. The last time I used it was on a school trip more than 10 years ago. I put it on the bed and started setting aside some clothes. Not many, just what was necessary. The rest I could buy along the way. As I folded each garment carefully, an idea began to take shape in my mind. An idea that 24 hours earlier I would never have considered. Christmas night was long and silent. I couldn't sleep, so I spent hours planning what I would do next. The feeling of betrayal still burned in my chest, but now there was something stronger: determination. In the morning, even before the sun came up, I was ready. I dressed with care as if for a special occasion, and in a way it was, the first day of the rest of my life. The trip to Edward's house was silent. Sitting in the passenger seat, I clutched the envelope tightly in my trembling fingers. My driver, a kind gentleman who had driven me other times, respected my silence. He probably thought it was strange for a 70-year-old woman to go out the morning after Christmas to deliver a letter, but he didn't ask questions. The morning of the 26th had that strange post-holiday calm. Through the taxi window, I observed the Christmas decorations that now seemed to lose their shine under the cold daylight. The streets were practically empty. When we arrived in front of Edward's house, or rather the house that I had bought years ago and allowed him to live in, I noticed there were still 2 extra cars in the driveway. I recognized one as belonging to Vanessa's parents. The other probably belonged to some important friend who had stayed for breakfast. "Can you wait a moment, please?" I asked the driver. "I won't be long." I got out of the car holding the envelope with shaking hands. In it, besides the letter explaining my decision to leave, there was an official document, a formal eviction notice. The house where my son lived with his wife was in my name. It always had been. An investment I made thinking of his future, but which I would now use as the instrument of my freedom, and perhaps the hardest lesson he would ever receive. I hadn't slept all night. Slept all. His words echoed in my mind. "There's no room for you." The image of my pudding being taken inside while the door closed in my face. "No one important," he had said. Those words burned like a red-hot iron. I walked slowly to the door, feeling the weight of my 70 years and all the decisions that had brought me here. Carefully, I placed the envelope under the welcome mat, leaving only a small part visible. I rang the doorbell and turned to go back to the taxi. I didn't want to see his face or Vanessa's, or the important guests who had taken my place. I got back into the taxi, but I asked the driver to wait a little longer. "Ma'am, is everything all right?" he asked, noticing my agitation. "Yes," I replied, but my voice betrayed the contained emotion. "I just want to make sure they get the letter." A few minutes passed. I started to think that maybe I should just leave, that I could let my lawyer handle the rest. But then the door opened. Edward appeared still in his robe, probably to get the newspaper. He bent down, noticed the envelope, and picked it up with a confused expression. He opened it right there on the porch, pulled out the papers inside, and began to read. I saw the change in his face, as if I were watching a movie in slow motion. First confusion, then disbelief, and finally shock and rage. His face, always so composed and controlled, twisted into a mask of fury. "What?" he yelled so loud I could hear him perfectly through the closed taxi window. "Is this some kind of joke?" He came out to the sidewalk, looking around frantically. His eyes found the stopped taxi, and for a second our gazes met. Recognition flashed in his eyes. "Mom!" he shouted, running toward the car with the crumpled papers in his hand. "Have you lost your mind?" The driver looked at me alarmed. "Ma'am, we can go, please," I said calmly, though my heart was pounding like a drum inside my chest. The car started to move, but Edward was already catching up, banging on the window hard. "You can't do this! This house is mine! You promised!" His screams were a mix of rage and desperation. "Ungrateful old woman, after everything I did for you!" Everything he did for me. The irony was so thick I almost laughed. Vanessa appeared at the door still in her pajamas, followed by her elegantly dressed parents. They all watched the scene with astonishment. "What is going on?" I heard Vanessa ask, her high-pitched voice cutting the morning air. "My mother has gone crazy," Edward yelled, waving the papers. "She's evicting us. She says we have 30 days to get out." The taxi sped up, and we left behind the image of my son in his expensive robe, screaming like a child who was denied a toy. The eviction papers fluttered in his hand like a reverse white flag, not of surrender, but of war. When we reached the corner, my phone started to vibrate. "Edward?" I ignored it. It vibrated again. "Vanessa this time." I turned the device off completely. "To the airport, please," I said to the driver, feeling a strange calm wash over me. "I have a flight to Lisbon in a few hours." As we drove away from the elegant neighborhood where my son lived temporarily, as he now knew, I took the $100,000 check I had planned to give him out of my purse. With a deliberate movement, I tore it in half, then into 4 pieces, then 8. It was the end of a chapter. The money I had saved for decades to give to my son would now be used to start my new life. As for the house, my lawyer would handle the sale as soon as the eviction period was over. Edward and Vanessa would have to find a place that fit their budget, a place where, ironically, there might not be room for all those important people. I looked out the taxi window at the clear sky of that post-Christmas morning. For the first time in many years, I felt the sweet taste of freedom. And it was more delicious than any Christmas pudding. During the ride, I took my cell phone out of my purse. I only had 4 frequent contacts: Edward, my neighbor Martha, my longtime friend Susan, and the Chinese takeout I occasionally ordered. I turned off the device and put it away again. From that moment on, I would be unreachable. At the airport, I headed to the first airline counter I found. A young clerk smiled at me. "Good morning, ma'am. How can I help you?" "I want to buy a ticket for the first available flight," I replied. "Where would you like to go, ma'am?" I hesitated for a second. "Anywhere far away from here." The clerk looked confused for a moment, but then her smile widened. "We have a flight to Lisbon leaving in 2 hours. There are still seats available." "Lisbon," I repeated almost to myself. As a young woman, I always dreamed of visiting Portugal, the land of my grandparents. It seemed fitting to start my new journey from there. "Perfect, I'll take it." While the clerk processed my purchase, I looked around. Families returning home after the holidays, couples holding hands, children running excitedly, and me, a 70-year-old woman about to embark on the greatest adventure of my life, completely alone. I should have been scared, but strangely, I felt calm. Maybe it was the certainty of doing the right thing, or maybe it was just the relief of finally putting myself first after so many decades. With the ticket in hand and my small suitcase checked, I went through security and headed to the departure gate. While I waited, I allowed myself to think about Edward. Would he be awake by now? Would he have found my letter? What would he think when he couldn't reach me? A part of me wanted him to suffer to feel at least a fraction of the pain he caused me. But another part, the part that would always be a mother, hoped my absence would make him reflect and grow as a person. The boarding announcement interrupted my thoughts. I stood up, adjusted my coat, and walked toward the plane that would take me far away from everything I knew. When I found my window seat, I settled in and took a deep breath. I looked one last time at the airport of the city where I spent my entire life, where I raised my son, where I buried my husband, where I taught generations of students. The plane began to taxi, and I felt a single tear run down my face. It wasn't a tear of sadness, but of farewell, of closing a chapter. When we finally took off, I felt a strange peace settle over me. As the city became smaller and smaller below us, I thought about the $100,000 check in my purse. The money I had long earmarked for Edward would now be used for my own happiness. A delayed happiness, it's true, but still mine. Lisbon would be just the beginning. After that, who knows, Paris, Rome, Athens, all the places I always dreamed of seeing, but never allowed myself because I was always prioritizing my son's dreams. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in many years, I smiled genuinely. The future was uncertain, but it was mine, only mine. Lisbon welcomed me with a surprisingly clear blue sky for a winter day. When I left the airport, the fresh air filled my lungs with a sense of renewal. I took a taxi to the hotel I had booked during the flight, a small family-run establishment in the heart of the Alfama district. The receptionist, a woman a few years younger than me, smiled when she saw me arrive. "First time in Lisbon?" she asked as she checked me in. "First time anywhere outside my country," I replied honestly. She looked at me with an expression of surprise, and then her smile widened. "Then, this is a very special occasion. I'll give you a room with a view of the river." When I entered the room and opened the curtains, my breath caught. The Tagus River stretched out majestically before me, reflecting the sunlight like millions of diamonds dancing on the surface. In the distance, the imposing 25th of April bridge vaguely resembled the Golden Gate in San Francisco, which I only knew from photographs. I sat in the small armchair by the window, mesmerized by the view. It was as if the whole city was welcoming me, saying, "You took a while, but you're finally here." That night I ventured out alone. The Alfama district, with its narrow, winding streets, was a charming labyrinth. I found a small restaurant where a woman was singing fado, that Portuguese music full of melancholy and longing that seemed to speak directly to my soul. As I savored a plate of codfish and a glass of green wine, I realized I hadn't thought about Edward since I landed. It was as if with the physical distance, I had also created an emotional distance. It's not that I had forgotten him, that would be impossible, but the pain I felt had transformed into something different, less sharp. In the days that followed, I explored every corner of Lisbon. I visited St. George's Castle, from where I looked out over the entire city. I strolled through the elegant neighborhoods of Chiado and Príncipe Real. I tasted the famous custard tarts. I crossed the river to see the Christ the King statue. In each place I met people, tourists like me or locals with whom I chatted briefly. Without the weight of being Edward's mother, I was just Helen, a curious traveler discovering the world. After 2 weeks in Lisbon, I decided it was time to continue my journey. All of Europe was at my disposal, and I had enough resources to explore as I pleased. I chose Paris as my next destination. The City of Light had always held a fascination for me, mainly because of the books I read. I booked a train ticket. I wanted to see the landscape change gradually, something impossible on a plane. The night before I left, while packing my suitcase, I turned on my cell phone for the first time since I had left the country. Immediately, dozens of notifications flooded the screen. Voicemails, text messages, emails, all from Edward. My heart pounded. For a moment, I thought about listening to the messages, reading the emails, finding out what my son had to say. But then I remembered the pain, the no one important. The door closed on Christmas night. I turned the phone off again without opening a single message. I wasn't ready. Maybe I never would be. The next day, I boarded the train to Paris with a lighter heart than I imagined possible. The landscape passing by the window was like a movie. Green fields, small villages, mountains in the distance. With every mile the train traveled, I felt more distant from the person I was and closer to the person I was becoming. Paris exceeded all my expectations. The Eiffel Tower, the Louvre, Notre Dame, still under reconstruction after the fire Montmartre. Every place seemed straight out of a dream. I stayed in a small hotel in Le Marais, a neighborhood full of life and history. In a cafe near my hotel, I met Marie, a French widow my age, who became my first true friend in this new phase of my life. She showed me a Paris that tourists rarely see. Hidden little bookstores, secret gardens, the best places to watch the sunset over the Seine. It's never too late to start over, Marie told me one afternoon while we were having tea in her cozy apartment. My husband died 5 years ago, and I thought my life was over, but then I realized I still had a lot of life left to live. Her words resonated within me. I, too, had a lot of life ahead of me despite my 70 years, and I was determined to live it fully. The months passed, and I continued my journey through Europe. After Paris came Rome with its ancient ruins and majestic churches. Then Florence, where the Renaissance art left me breathless. Venice and its winding canals. Barcelona with Gaudi's fantastical architecture. Amsterdam and its incomparable museums. In each city, I created a small routine. I found a cafe where I had my breakfast daily. I made friends with the waiters. I discovered the less touristy corners. I no longer felt like a foreigner. The whole world had become my home. It was in Vienna, almost 6 months after my departure, that I finally worked up the courage to check my messages again. Sitting in an elegant cafe on the Ringstrasse with a slice of soccer torte in front of me, I turned on my phone. Hundreds of notifications, voicemails from Edward, each one more desperate as time went on, emails begging for news from me, even messages from Vanessa, his wife, something I never expected. With trembling hands, I opened the first email. "Mom, where are you? Please call me. I'm worried." I continued reading the messages, each more desperate than the last. Another a week later. "Mom, I've already checked all the hospitals in the city. I went to your apartment, talked to your neighbors. No one knows anything about you. Please just tell me you're okay." And another, a month later. "Mom, I hired a detective to find you. He found out you took a flight to Lisbon. I'm thinking of going there. I need to see you to ask for your forgiveness. Please answer." The voicemails were even more distressing. In the first one, Edward sounded irritated, as if my departure was an inconvenience for him. "Mom, what is this about an eviction? You can't do this to us. Call me immediately." But in the following ones, his voice trembled, sometimes broken by sobs. "Mom, please, the real estate agency already contacted us. Vanessa is panicking. Her parents are furious with me. They say I should have put the house in my name. As if I could have predicted you would do this. Please, let's talk." In another message 2 weeks later. "The lawyers confirmed. The house is entirely yours. We have no way to fight it. We're looking for another place, but it's hard to find something of the same standard with what I earn at the restaurant. Vanessa is threatening to go back to her parents' house." "Mom, I'm begging you, don't do this to us." The last message was from just 3 days ago. "Mom, I don't know if you're getting my messages. Maybe you changed your number. Maybe you're deliberately ignoring me. I wouldn't blame you if you were. What I did on Christmas Eve was unforgivable. I always put other people before you. Friends, Vanessa, her parents. I think I just thought you would always be there no matter how I treated you. What a terrible mistake. We had to leave the house. We're living in a much smaller place now. Vanessa isn't handling the situation well and asked me for a divorce. She says she didn't get married to live like this. Her parents barely speak to me anymore. The restaurant isn't doing well. I think I'll have to sell it. Mom, if you're hearing this, I want you to know that I love you, and that I'm sorry more than I could ever express in words." Tears streamed down my face as I listened to my son's voice. The waiter approached, concerned, offering me a handkerchief. "Are you all right?" he asked in hesitant English. "Yes," I replied, drying my tears. "Just news from home." I sat there for a long time, absorbing everything I had heard. Edward seemed genuinely repentant, transformed by my absence and by the consequences of his actions. A part of me felt a bitter satisfaction. He was finally experiencing what it meant to lose something important, just as I lost my place in his life that Christmas night. But another part of me, the one that would always be a mother, ached, imagining his suffering. That's not what I wanted. I didn't want to destroy him, just teach him a lesson. After much reflection, I decided to send a single email. "Edward, I am safe and well. I have spent the last few months traveling through Europe, seeing places I always dreamed of. This journey has been transformative for me. I heard your messages, and I understand you are going through difficult times. As for the house, my decision stands. It will be sold, and the money will be invested in my future, a future I postponed for decades while prioritizing yours. I believe in your remorse, and that is important. Sometimes we need to lose something to understand its true value. You lost me the night you told me there was no room for me at your table, that I was no one important. I lost the son I thought I had raised, that sensitive boy who grew up under my care after his father's death. Perhaps one day we can rebuild something new between us. Not like before. That relationship is over. But perhaps something more balanced, based on mutual respect. I need more time for myself. When I am ready, I will contact you again. Helen." I sent the email and turned off the phone again. I paid my bill and went for a walk through the streets of Vienna, feeling simultaneously lighter and more thoughtful. In the weeks that followed, I continued my journey, now heading to Northern Europe. I visited Prague, Berlin, Copenhagen, Stockholm. In each place, I thought about Edward, about how he was dealing with the changes in his life. Sometimes I almost called, but I always pulled back at the last moment. It wasn't time yet. It was in a small coastal town in Norway, watching the phenomenon of the northern lights for the first time, that I had an epiphany. The green and purple lights danced in the night sky like ancestral spirits, creating a spectacle of indescribable beauty. In that moment, I understood that forgiveness, true, deep, unconditional forgiveness, was not just a gift we give to others, but mainly to ourselves. I took my phone out of my pocket, and with fingers trembling from the cold and emotion, I called Edward. The phone rang several times before he answered. When I finally heard his voice, my heart leaped. "Hello." He sounded hesitant, as if he didn't recognize the international number. "Edward," my voice faltered. "It's me." Silence on the other end of the line, then a shaky breath that sounded like a held-back sob. Mom, is that really you?" "Yes, son." My voice was firmer now. "It's me." "My God, Mom, where are you? Are you okay? Why did it take you so long to get in touch?" The questions came in a desperate flood. "I'm in Norway," I replied calmly. "I'm watching the northern lights right this very moment. It's the most incredible sight I've ever seen." "Norway." Edward sounded confused. "Mom, you've been traveling all over the world this whole time." "Yes," I replied simply. "I'm seeing all the places I always dreamed of, and discovering who I am when I'm not just your mother." Another silence, longer this time. When Edward spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. "I ruined everything, didn't I, Christmas Eve? You were coming to visit us with that pudding you always made for me, and I sent you away." "Yes," I replied bluntly. There was no reason to deny or soften what happened. "It was painful, Edward, more painful than anything I've ever experienced. Mom, I will never forgive myself. When I read your letter when I got the eviction notice, it was like waking up from a nightmare to find out the reality was even worse." I closed my eyes, letting the tears flow freely down my face. Above me, the aurora lights continued their ethereal dance. "What happened after I left?" I asked. "You mentioned in the messages that you had to leave the house, that Vanessa asked for a divorce." Edward sighed deeply before answering. "When I found your letter and the eviction notice the morning after Christmas, I panicked. Seeing you leave in that taxi while I was yelling was humiliating and terrifying at the same time. I tried to call, but your phone was off. I went to your apartment, but the neighbor said you had turned in your keys, that you were moving out." He paused, and I could hear his ragged breathing. "After a few weeks, when I realized you were really gone, I had to face the reality of the eviction. I hired a lawyer, but it was useless. The house was well and truly in your name, and the agreement we had was only verbal. We had 30 days to get out." "And where did you go?" I asked softly. "We rented a much smaller apartment on the other side of town. Vanessa hated it from day one. She was used to luxury to space. The divorce was inevitable, really. She went back to her parents' house 2 months ago." "I'm sorry," I said, and I truly meant it. I never wanted my son to suffer so much, only for him to understand the value of respect and family love. "Don't be," Edward replied with a firmness that surprised me. "It was the best thing that could have happened. I realized my marriage was as empty as the way I treated you that night. Vanessa was only with me for the status, for the money, for appearances. When we lost the house, when things got tough, she just gave up." "And the restaurant?" I asked, remembering his last message. "I sold it a month ago," he replied, and to my surprise, there was no sadness in his voice. I realized it was never really my dream. It was just something I did to impress others, to look successful in the eyes of Vanessa's parents, of important friends. "And what are you doing now?" "I went back to teaching cooking classes," he said, and I could feel a smile in his voice. "Remember how I always loved to teach, even as a teenager? I have a small studio now. Nothing fancy, but it's mine. The students are ordinary people who really love food, not those who just want to post pictures on social media." An unexpected wave of pride washed over me. This sounded more like the Edward I knew, the boy who grew up under my care. "That sounds wonderful, son," I said sincerely. We were silent for a few moments, each of us absorbing the dramatic changes that had occurred in our lives. "Are you ever coming back, Mom?" he finally asked, his voice almost childlike in its vulnerability. I looked up again at the night sky where the auroras continued their magical show. "I don't know yet, Edward. This journey has been important for me. I'm getting to know parts of myself I never even knew existed." "I understand," he replied, though I could sense his disappointment. Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive me?" The question hung in the air, loaded with hope and fear. "Edward," I replied calmly, "I am already on the path to forgiveness. But forgiving doesn't mean forgetting or going back to what we were before. It means I'm choosing not to let the pain of the past determine my future." "You have every right to never want to see me again," he said, his voice thick. "That's not it," I corrected gently. "I just need to finish this journey I started. I need to find out who Helen is besides being Edward's mother." "And who is she?" he asked with genuine interest. I smiled to myself, watching the dancing lights in the sky. I'm discovering that she's brave, curious, adventurous, someone who appreciates art and music, who isn't afraid to talk to strangers, who can manage in countries where she doesn't even speak the language. "You were always all of those things, Mom," Edward said softly. "I was just the one who never saw it." The tears streamed down my face again, but now they were different, not of resentment, but of reconciliation. "As for the money from the sale of the house," I continued, "I've already decided what I'm going to do with it." "It's yours, Mom. You have every right." "I'm going to buy a small house in Portugal," I interrupted, "on the coast not far from Lisbon, a place where I can settle down, have my own garden, wake up hearing the sea every day." "It sounds perfect," he said, and I could feel he was speaking sincerely. "And if one day you want to visit me," I added, "there will be a room for you, a place at my table, always." I heard a choked sob on the other end of the line. "I would love that, Mom, more than anything." "I'll be back eventually to get some things settled pending matters," I promised. "But when I return, it will be on my own terms, as the woman I am becoming, not just as your mother." "I can't wait to meet that woman," he replied, and I could hear the smile in his voice. We talked for a while longer before saying goodbye, promising to keep in regular contact. When I hung up the phone, I felt as if a circle had closed, but not completely. There were still chapters to be written in this story. The money from the eviction, added to what I had saved for decades to give to Edward, would now be invested in myself. The irony was not lost on me. The house I bought, thinking of my son's future, ended up becoming the instrument of my financial and emotional liberation. In the following months, I kept in regular contact with Edward. We exchanged emails weekly. Sometimes we had video calls. He would show me his small cooking studio, the dishes he was teaching, tell me about his students. I would share my adventures, the places I visited, the people I met. When I finally found the perfect house in Portugal, a small stone building overlooking the Atlantic, surrounded by ancient olive trees, I sent him the photos. His reply moved me. "It looks like the perfect place for you, Mom. A new beginning. I hope one day you'll invite me to visit. Maybe next Christmas. I promise this time there will be more than enough room for you at the table." I smiled, reading his words. Next Christmas would be different. I wouldn't spend it alone in an empty house, nor would I be excluded from my son's table. It would be the first Christmas of my new life, a life I chose for myself, where I wasn't just someone's mother, but Helen, a whole woman complete in herself. And if Edward came, as he promised, there would be room for him. Not because he was my son, but because he now seemed to be someone I would like to have at my table, someone who learned to value not just what people can offer, but who they really are. The lesson had been hard for both of us, but as often happens with life's most valuable lessons, it was necessary. Sometimes you have to lose something to really learn to value it, and sometimes you have to leave the comfort of the familiar to discover who you really are. That Christmas I spent alone in an empty house ended up being the most valuable gift I ever received. The gift of rediscovering myself and teaching my son the true meaning of family. Now, if you like this story, click subscribe and tell me in the comments what part left you speechless. Oh, and don't forget to become a member to get access to exclusive videos that I don't post here. I'll be waiting for you there.